I think you can start, Renee, if you're ready.
All right. Welcome to this digital press conference hosted by the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, or the CIAG. Thank you so much for everybody who's here this afternoon joining us. The format of this press conference will be as follows. First, Phil Craig will make a statement on behalf of the CIAG in terms of where we are. After that, we'll be taking questions from the press. And after that, all other questions from the public will also be responded to. Just a few practicalities. You can post your questions in the chat box at any time, but members of the press, please just identify yourself by first stating your name and also the publication that you represent before posting your question. If we don't get to all the questions in the allotted time, we will answer them on our social media platforms. So please join us on our various social media platforms. And without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Phil now.
Thank you, Renee, and thank you to everybody who's joined us this afternoon. Since its formation in 2020, our organisation has been at the forefront of the fight for Western Cape independence. It has been the most remarkable and humbling privilege to observe ordinary South Africans come together from all walks of life and all parts of the country to make a stand for the values and cultures which they hold most dear. Cape independence is an iceberg. Our opponents point to the small visible parts and presume that there's not much to see, but under the waves, an unshakable dream has taken hold in the hearts of the Western Cape people. South Africa has failed us. South Africa is no longer a country we want to be part of. The South African government is not our government. We revile its ministers and we despise their arrogant, self-serving cohorts who think we're too stupid to see them for what they truly are. But every dog has its day, and those dogs will play no part in our future. We are the coloured people who were here first, and who refuse to be forgotten for one day longer. We are the white people who built this country and have no intention whatsoever of going back to Holland. We are the black people who will not be selling our souls for an ANC t-shirt. And if you don't like it, then you can leave. We cannot save South Africa where we do not form, we cannot save South Africa where we do not form a majority and never will. But here in the Western Cape, we hold our destiny in our own hands. We can build our new Jerusalem. But the window of opportunity is closing fast. The Western Cape is being colonized by people who say it must look like the rest of South Africa. Well, for Cape independence supporters, that is the very last thing that we want. And in 2024, perhaps for the last time, Western Cape voters will decide for themselves what that future looks like. In our polling just 2 months ago, 68% of Western Cape voters said they supported a referendum on Cape independence, and 58% said they supported Cape independence itself. This is the future that a clear majority of us now want. And the process by which a people demonstrate their will for independence is very well established. And in the last 50 years, 81 independence referendums have been conducted around the world. The Western Cape and South African constitutions empower only one person to call a referendum on Cape independence, and that is the Premier of the Western Cape. The Western Cape Premier swears an oath to act in the best interests of the Western Cape people. And we cannot imagine that the authors of our constitution ever envisaged that a premier would exercise this power to further his own personal political opinion, rather than on behalf of the Western Cape people he was elected to serve. In 2021, ahead of that year's elections, the Democratic Alliance promised the CIAG that it would hold a referendum which included a question on Cape independence. It has not done so, instead choosing to continually stall the process. With the 2024 elections in view, it was critical for Cape independence supporters to know whether the DA were going to call a referendum on Cape independence or not. So earlier this month, on the 3rd of October, we presented Premier Winde with a letter signed by over 30,000 Western Cape voters. We asked him one simple question: will you call a referendum on Cape independence? Yes or no? And on the 10th of October, Premier Winde responded, and the answer was no. And he said this: I do not believe, and I have repeatedly stated so, that the Western Cape should seek independence from South Africa. And not only does this break the agreement made between the CIAG and the DA, but it elevates the personal political views of one man above those of the 68% of Western Cape citizens who want a Cape independence referendum to be held. This is really disappointing, but we mustn't despair. A trusted advisor often said to me, well, now you know. And those advocating for Cape independence do so because we're not willing to be helpless passengers on somebody else's ship. Now, whether it's Winde or the ANC who is steering the ship in the wrong direction is ultimately of little consequence. We are a people who intend to write our own destiny. So the answer is now very simple indeed. If you want Cape independence, then in 2024, you're going to have to vote for Cape independence. And that now means voting against the DA. We're all too aware that this will leave many people feeling very uncomfortable. The DA have done a good job of running the Western Cape, and we do not want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. The CIAG have therefore taken two significant actions, which we trust will reassure Cape independence supporters, and which will ensure that the Western Cape retains a DA government rather than an ANC one, but which forces that government to deliver the referendum on Cape independence, which 68% of Western Cape voters want. The first step was to produce a detailed position paper which informs Cape independence supporters, journalists, and the general public what has been going on behind the scenes for the last 3 years, and why it has become necessary to encourage people to vote against the DA in 2024. It was never our intention to force people to have to choose between voting for any specific political party and voting for Cape independence. The whole point of independence referendums is that they separate the decision of whether a people want to be able to govern themselves from the very different decision of how and by whom they wish to be governed. As such, referendums and elections are most definitely not the same thing. Unfortunately, by refusing to call a referendum which 68% of Western Cape voters want, the DA have now forced this choice upon us, whether we like it or not. So the second step which we have taken has been to actively facilitate alternative political options, which will ensure that the Western Cape remains the best run province in what is currently South Africa, whilst obtaining the independence referendum which the overwhelming majority of the Western Cape people support. And I'd now like to share more details about these two actions with you. The first of these is our position paper, and it answers the question, how did we get here? And by this we mean the CIAG asking Cape independence supporters to vote against the DA. And I'm going to try and condense the CIAG's last 3 years' work into just 12 slides, which we're now going to share with you. And I'm going to start with the words of Article 20 of the African Charter on Humans and People's Rights, which South Africa has signed. All people shall have the right to existence. They shall have the unquestionable and inalienable right to self-determination. They shall freely determine their political status and shall pursue their economic and social development according to the policy that they have freely chosen. And increasingly, many of us just do not identify with South Africa and its government. We feel helpless and we feel trapped in a country that doesn't feel like our home. Well, the first task for the CIAG when it was formed was to show people that a different future was possible. And we could live in a country that we can be proud of, and a country where we can feel safe and welcome. And in the last 50 years, as you can see from this first slide, there's been 81 independence referendums around the world, one on average every 7 months. And in that time, 35 countries have gained their independence, on average, one in every 17 months. So our task was to say, hey, Cape independence is possible. Our second task then was to grow support for the idea. We needed to plant the seeds and allow this idea to germinate. And we've tracked our progress using polling since 2020. And in 2023, the unthinkable is no longer unthinkable. We now have majority support in the Western Cape for Cape independence, and we can win a referendum. Now, some people ask us, why does the CIAG have this obsession with the DA? Some of them ask it because they dislike the DA, they don't want us to work with them. Others, which now includes the DA themselves, say, please just leave the DA out of this. Well, the answer lies in section 127 of the National Constitution and 37 of the Western Cape Constitution. The DA are the gatekeepers of Cape independence. Only the Western Cape Premier can call a referendum on Cape independence. So the reality is that Cape independence cannot and will not happen unless the DA play their part. And therefore, the DA must be the focal point of pressure from the Cape independence movement. Now, what does political pressure look like? Well, here is just a small selection of the news headlines from 2021. And I'd like to acknowledge here some of our colleagues. I'd like to acknowledge the Freedom Front Plus, the 5th largest political party in South Africa, who came out in support of Cape independence in 2021. I'd like to acknowledge Cape Exit, who amassed in 2021 800,000 members and had more than 1 in 4 Western Cape voters signed up promising to vote leave in a referendum. And I'd like to acknowledge the Cape Independence Party. And just 12 months after the CIAG was formed, the DA blinked. And on the 23rd of April 2021, DA leader John Steenhuisen promised that the DA would fix the referendum legislation and it would call a referendum which included a question on Cape independence. And just a few weeks later, on the 21st of June 2021, the DA published its referendum legislation in the Government Gazette. Now, 2021 was an election year, and of course, elections are the great inflection point of politics. Politicians have to sing for their supper, and they must account to the electorate. So the CIAG created a voting app, which identified in every single ward in the Western Cape which councillors supported Cape independence and which ones didn't. And we created an election guide which identified the political position or the position of every major political party in the Western Cape. And it would do well just to remember the political circumstances of that time. It was the first ever electoral downturn for the DA. It was the first election after the Mamisi Maimane era. And Helen Zille said to the CIAG, please don't do this to us. And we didn't have to, because instead we were able to secure a public commitment from the DA to a referendum. And we made this statement with the agreement of the DA that the DA and 7 other political parties were now willing to support a referendum on Cape independence. And you can see John Steenhuisen himself said, whilst we don't support Cape independence, people should have a right to a referendum to make choices going forward. Well, the DA did well in those elections. The referendum agreement had been secured, and on the 13th of January 2020, the CIAG met with John Steenhuisen and Helen Zille, and they reassured us that the referendum legislation, which is already starting to run behind schedule, was their top priority, or one of their top priorities, and that it would be tabled within the next few weeks. And the conversation moved on to what else could we do whilst we were waiting for the referendum legislation to run its course. And for us at the CIAG, this is what we would call de facto independence. For the DA, they prefer to call it provincial autonomy. But it's the same thing. How can we start getting power away from the government in Pretoria and delivering it to the government in the Western Cape? And the CIAG then produced a white paper on the law. The DA are very focused on constitutional law, inward looking, and we said, look, the solution to getting power away from Pretoria lies in international law and the right to self-determination. And the CIAG proposed the formation of a Western Cape devolution working group, which would be a broad political church between political parties, civic organizations, and academics who had a shared set of values, and they wanted the Western Cape to be able to get autonomy, and other provinces also who felt the same way. Our legal paper was reviewed by several legal experts and then circulated. And this legal paper became the basis for what was later to become the Western Cape People's Bill. The Western Cape Devolution Working Group was then formed. And in 2019, when he was elected, Premier Winde had made two major promises. They were the cornerstone of his manifesto. He promised to fight for the formation of a professional provincial police force, which was funded by national government. And he promised to fight for a safe and reliable rail service which ran on time. And the CIAG offered its unconditional support to the DA to help it to achieve these two goals. But when the DA shared their plans, it was clear that when they made these promises in 2019, they had absolutely no idea how they were going to deliver them. They promised something that they could not deliver. And as we worked together as a group, it was very, very clear that devolution of the Western Cape was not possible without the ANC's cooperation. And meanwhile, the ANC made it abundantly clear that there was going to be no cooperation. And as we now approach the 2024 elections, it's a matter of fact that Premier Winde has failed to deliver on either of these two key promises. Now, the CIAG then said, don't worry, there is a way to do this without the ANC's consent. And it referred the devolution working group and the DA back to this legal paper on self-determination. The CIAG drafted the Western Cape People's Bill, and for the avoidance of doubt, the Western Cape People's Bill is not an independence bill. It's a bill on self-determination, and it would allow the Western Cape to either claim autonomy, to claim federal autonomy or a federal status, or independence. And which of those would be a decision for the Western Cape government, which the DA led. So therefore, there shouldn't have been an issue here, but the DA stalled for 8 months. And eventually, the Freedom Front Plus agreed to table the bill and force the DA's hand and force them into a position one way or the other. And the DA then said they were going to oppose the Western Cape People's Bill. And the rationale was this, that this bill might lead to independence if the Western Cape people wanted it, and therefore they'd rather not even risk trying to get federalism if it might lead to independence. And at this point, the DA was actively withholding power from the Western Cape people. Now, meanwhile, whilst this Western Cape devolution working group was in progress, Alan Winde on the 8th of September 2022 stood up in the Western Cape Parliament and mocked Cape independence supporters. He said that a referendum on Cape independence must be national rather than provincial. And of course, this is complete nonsense. And we challenged Premier Winde to say, out of those 81 independence referendums, exactly how many were national referendums? And the answer, of course, is none. And Alan Winde didn't answer our question. And he also said that we don't need referendums because we have a referendum in the province every 5 years. It's called an election. And at this point in time, despite numerous promises to the contrary, the DA still hadn't tabled its own referendum legislation. And it was now 15 months after they published their intention to do so in the Gazette. So the CIAG then formally raised this with John Steenhuisen and Helen Ziller. And we asked for a written agreement, a referendum accord, to be agreed and published ahead of the 2024 elections, which would give Cape independence supporters and other voters clarity over this issue of Cape independence and a referendum. And we gave the DA 6 months to agree the wording and sort out the details. And actually, because we were then busy with the Western Cape People's Bill, we actually gave them a further 2 months grace period. But in June 2023, the DA refused to put in writing the promise that they'd made verbally in 2021. So now this led forward, we had to somehow bring these private discussions into the public domain and to a conclusion ahead of the 2024 elections. So first of all, in July and August, we polled again to confirm the current level of support for Cape independence. In September, we collected 30,000 signatures from Western Cape voters on a letter to Premier Winde calling for a referendum. And then on the 3rd of October, we issued that letter to Premier Winde and we gave him 7 days to respond. Are you going to call a referendum on Cape independence, yes or no? And on the 10th of October, Premier Winde said no, he doesn't like Cape independence. Well, this wasn't a surprise to us, and if you're going to forgive the pun, we could see which way the wind was blowing. but the CIAG had been making contingency plans for this eventuality for some time. And what you're now going to see in the next few weeks will be the launching of a single issue referendum party, which is focused on obtaining a referendum in the Western Cape. Now, this is the story of how we arrived at the point of saying, if you want Cape independence, you're going to have to vote for it in 2024. And that means voting against the DA and for a party that supports Cape independence. And we've set all of this information out in a position paper, which for anyone who wants to obtain a copy is now available on our website at www.capeindependence.org. Now, this also brings us on to the second of our two steps, which we've taken to ensure that Cape independence supporters can feel comfortable that voting for Cape independence won't result in the DA government being removed from power in the Western Cape, but instead will force them to listen to the people who elected them and who want a referendum on Cape independence. And I think it's really important to emphasize at this stage that the CIAG is not in any way anti-DA as an organization. Many of us are in fact lifelong DA voters. We recognize and applaud many of the excellent things that the DA-led Western Cape government has done, and which has resulted in the Western Cape being without doubt the best run and best performing province in South Africa. But the harsh reality is that being better than the rest of South Africa is not enough. Our current system of government means that the Western Cape government is operating with both hands tied behind its back. And in the Western Cape, we do not control economic policy. And as a result, we have an unemployment rate of over 25%. We do not control our own police force. And as a result, we have the highest murder rate in the world. We do not control taxation and how our money is spent. And as a result, our Western Cape taxes are being used to subsidize corruption and incompetence in the rest of South Africa rather than to benefit the Western Cape people. And we do not control our own borders. And as a result, our province has been flooded by illegal land invaders, which forces our government to spend vast sums of money on those who are living here illegally at the expense of those who were born here and who are living here legally. All of us must be honest with ourselves and recognize that if we don't address these issues and take control of our destiny now, that a DA government in Cape Town is not going to save us when an ANC government, or worse, is making all of the critical decisions in Pretoria. Dr. Corné Mulder of the Freedom Front Plus summed it up perfectly when he said, the DA thinks it's going to export good governance into the rest of South Africa, but instead it's going to end up importing bad governance into the Western Cape. And we agree with him. It's also important to make clear that the situation we find ourselves in is not of our making. It was never our intention to oppose the DA. All we've ever asked for is that the Premier of the Western Cape uses the powers vested in him by the Constitution to call a referendum on Cape independence that the overwhelming majority of Western Cape voters want, and which allows the Western Cape people to decide for themselves whether or not they want to remain a part of a failing South African state. So by all means be angry and say it shouldn't be like this. You're right, it shouldn't, but be angry at the right organization. If the DA had kept its promise and listened to the 68% of Western Cape voters who want a referendum, then we would not be here today. They haven't kept that promise, and we are. And Cape independence supporters can be broadly split into two camps. 7 out of 10 want a DA-led Western Cape government and vote DA to get it, and the other 3 out of 10 are opposed to the DA. The CIAG has always been a broad political church and will continue to be so. We will support all political parties who support the peaceful and democratic pursuit of a non-racial, independent Western Cape. The 3 out of 10 Cape independence supporters who oppose the DA are well catered for. The Freedom Front Plus and the Cape Independence Party are both fully behind Cape independence, and the CIAG endorses both parties. Cape independence supporters should feel comfortable voting for either. But the 7 out of 10 who support both the DA and Cape independence have been put in an impossible situation by the DA, who are trying to make them choose between their present and their future. And the Referendum Party will be established to rescue these DA voters from this unfair dilemma. The Referendum Party will be a vote for a DA government and a vote for a Cape Independence referendum. As part of its manifesto, the Referendum Party will solemnly promise that whatever the circumstances, it will vote with the DA to allow it to form the Western Cape government and for the DA to continue to run the Western Cape. It will also promise that there are no circumstances whatsoever under which the Referendum Party will vote with either the ANC or the EFF. And if the Referendum Party can secure 100,000 votes, then there is an extremely high probability that the DA will need to work with the party in order to form a government. It would also place Cape Independence activists in both the national and provincial parliaments who will have no other agenda but to fight tooth and nail for Cape Independence. Now, before I close, I would just like to challenge you. As an organisation, we've opened the door wide for Cape Independence, but we cannot walk through it alone. The reality is, in 2024, it is either now or never for Cape Independence. Achieving 100,000 votes is a huge task, and it will take each and every one of us to get involved if we want to build a country that future generations can be proud of and call home. A first world country on Africa's southern tip. Now, if you leave it to us and go about your life as normal, we will fail. Now, we'll formally be launching the Referendum Party in the next few weeks. And once the final preparations have been completed, we will need branches and activists and campaigners. We will need each and every Cape Independence supporter to become ambassadors for the party. We need to make Cape Independence the talk of every braai, of every dinner table, and of every staff room. If we can do that, then together we can change the course of history and create a legacy which will be talked of for generations to come. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Together we can do this. May God bless us all. Thank you. Renee, back to you.
Thank you, Phil. Just a reminder that the copy of our position paper, the infographics, and also this statement is available on the CIAG website, capeindependence.org, and it's also linked in the description, the YouTube description below. We will now be taking questions. So just again, a reminder to members of the press to please first identify yourself by your name and also your publication before posting your questions. All right, so the first question is, how many votes does the Referendum Party need to achieve in order to have a meaningful impact on the election?
Well, the ideal number, thank you, Robert. Look, the ideal number is 100,000. 100,000 is the number at which the DA will likely fall to 48%. And at 48%, they'll be unable to form a government without making a coalition with one of the coalition parties. So 100,000 is the target. But obviously there are some milestones along the way. At 30,000, we anticipate they'll be able to get a seat in the provincial parliament. And at 80,000 there will be a seat in the national parliament, by which time there will be 2 in the provincial parliament. And at 100,000, then we, as we say, we believe we'll be able to form a government with the DA, and we would have 2 national MPs and 3 provincial MEPs, and that would give us a very, very powerful foothold to force this issue of a Cape Independence referendum.
All right, then the next question is from Joan, and she wants to know, what are some of the hurdles that the CIAG could face to achieve a referendum?
Well, look, I think there are a number of hurdles, but I think we're already facing them. And the bottom line is, what are we facing now? We are facing the belligerence and perhaps even cowardice of a Western Cape Premier who is flying in the face of the Western Cape people, and I think that is the biggest hurdle that we've got to overcome. And there are no shortcuts here. Often, and I think we've used this analogy, and Renee, you and I have spoken about this, and used the story of Moses going back to the Pharaohs, and we've made an agreement, they've broken it. We've engaged several times, and unfortunately we're going to have to keep on going back and ramping up the pressure until the DA do the democratic and decent and honest thing, which is something they should have done all along in the first place, and just call a referendum. And for us, it's very, very frustrating. We've got a lot of time for the DA. It's in the name, Democratic Alliance. It's slightly bizarre that we have a political party that has democratic in its name and is doing everything it possibly can to avoid asking the people it governs what they want, because it knows the answer and it knows it's different to what they want. So very frustrating. But there you go.
Thanks. Then Slushki, his question is, will North and Eastern Cape join the Cape Republic?
Sure. So look, this is a question that often comes up, and it's a good question. So ultimately, we don't know what the final border will be for lots of reasons, and legally we start off with the Western Cape. So the initial referendum would be in the Western Cape, and at that point, the Western Cape would then have to vote for Cape independence, and negotiations would have to begin between the Western Cape government and the South African national government for Cape independence. Thereafter, as part of those discussions, then I think we would then look to broaden that out, and we would then love to see secondary referendums taking place at a municipal level along the borders, to establish who wants to be on which side of that border. And certainly, if we look at voting records, then we would expect that the ultimate independent Western Cape probably would concern a fair portion of the Northern Cape and some portion of the Eastern Cape.
Yeah. The next question is from Hardis Kluter, and his question is there enough time to achieve this number before next year?
Not easily is the honest answer, but we are where we are, and I guess that is exactly the reason that the DA have stalled for as long as they can. The longer that they stall, then obviously the less time we have. But here we are. But we have some very, very definite plans. We've been planning this referendum party now for 4 or 5 months. We're at a very, very advanced stage of planning, and we have some very, very specific tactics lined up. What helps is we don't need to convince everybody in the Western Cape to vote for the referendum party. We're not after power. We only want one thing. We only want a referendum. We know that we've got, that roughly speaking, there's somewhere in the region of 1.2 million Western Cape voters who support Cape independence. You have to hope that we can convince 100,000. But ultimately, it's not up to us. Then we can spread the word. We can put it out there. At some point, if people want Cape independence, they're going to have to vote for it. And we all the people who are in our organisation, I promise you, we will be voting for Cape independence. We can't speak for other people. I hope we get it right. It's difficult, but you know what? If we all club together, then absolutely we can achieve this, and we will. And I think that's the key. The CIAG is a fairly small organisation, and it's done very well because it operates in a niche. A political party is a whole different animal, and it's going to need branches. It's going to need people who really get stuck in. And I hope that this is going to get to the hearts of the public, and the people are going to say, look, you know what? It's worth me while just doing this for my children, for my grandchildren, for my grandparents and my great grandparents, because we have this country that we've all built and is absolutely magnificent, and surely it's worth a bit of effort in 2023 and 2024 to make sure that we preserve this wonderful part of the world for future generations.
Hi, thanks. The next question is from Jonathan van Rensburg. His question is, electioneering and registration costs money. How is the CIAG and the Referendum Party by association currently funded? And where do you see important sources of funding coming from?
So, look, funding is always a challenge for any organisation. I have to say, increasingly, we are extraordinarily blessed. So how are we funded? We're effectively always been funded by two things. We've been funded by lots of individual donors who make small monthly contributions, and then we have a smaller number of individuals who then make quite sizable donations. so far this year, 2 significant individuals have come forward and made sizable donations. And at this point in time, whilst we definitely need to get more to all that, we are funded to run this campaign. So the funding is in place to run this campaign. We would obviously love to get more funding, and the more funding we have, the more successful we can be as a campaign. But it's funded as a mixture of wealthy individuals who are willing to support this cause, and then lots of ordinary people who are willing to pay 100 Rand a month or 200 Rand a month to fight for the future that they want, and together that's a very powerful combination.
Yes. Cape Zuma, his question is, what can Cape Independence supporters and advocates do to help increase offline visibility? Businesses, schools, and some other organizations.
Fantastic. I've loved that you asked this question. Thank you, Cape Zuma. This is so important. This is one of the really critical differences. So we have appointed a head of activism, a guy called Essia, who's very experienced and a long-time Cape Independence supporter. And one of the first tasks we're going to have to do is to set up branches so that we can create focal points. We can't get to everybody. We can do so much with social media. We can do so much with clever marketing. But ultimately, this has to take hold on the ground. So we really urgently need to set up branches. That'll be one of the first tasks. We need people to join their local branch, to get involved and actually start spreading the word on the ground. We'll obviously support as best that we can, but that's going to be a really critical component of this whole thing. And that's a great question. And anything, this is all about just we've got it's such an obvious message. It's not a difficult sell, but actually we have to get out there and sell it, because as we all know, a lot of people are just not really aware of Cape Independence, or have this notion that somehow it's not possible because they've not really looked into it. And somehow we've got to get to people and say, look, you know what, now is the time. Give us this vote. This is the chance. It's now or never. Let's do it. And I hope that we're going to build up this branch network quite quickly. And we would love help from anybody who wants to get involved. We'll put Essia's details on our social media and on our website. We'll make it so you can contact him. In fact, I think I can give you the email address. It's from memory. I think it's just essia@capeindependence.org. But I'll put it on the thing anyway. And anybody who wants to help, please get involved. We want your help. We need your help.
The next question is from Joe Emilio. His question is, in theory, you should have upwards of 800,000 votes because of Cape Exit, correct?
I think that's the theory, but obviously, of course, not the reality. And I have to say, look, the Cape Exit are in a slightly difficult situation in terms of their mission. Their core mission is non-political. So therefore they can't directly get involved in politics because it's against their mandate, but they have worked really closely with the CIAG and continue to do so, increasingly so, I have to say. So and obviously people are being put in a very difficult situation. That's the reality. I mean, as I say, people who vote Freedom Front Plus or people who vote Cape Independence Party, it's fairly easy that they're already out of the dilemma. The worry is for people who say, look, you know what, I want a DA government and I'm voting for that because that's about my present. I know they do the best job in the Western Cape, but I also want Cape Independence because I see that I'm not going to have a future without it. So now people are being forced, and the DA are not doing that unknowingly. They're doing it knowingly. They know that actually it's very difficult to get people to vote against the DA because they do a good job of running the country, and therefore they're calculating that they can get away with not being held to account on Cape Independence. So the question really comes now, roughly speaking, 1 in 2, is very roughly speaking, roughly 1 in 2 Western Cape voters support Cape Independence and vote DA. So that's kind of that critical number. And actually, out of that number, which I think is about 1.5 million strong. In fact, less people vote. So let's call it 1 million strong because 1 million don't vote. So that's about 1 million strong, and we need to get 1 in 10, let's say, of those people to come and vote for the Referendum Party. And obviously, in Cape Exit, there'll be a lot of people there who do support Cape Independence, but are going to find it difficult to vote against the DA. I hope I'm wrong. I really hope I'm wrong. It's not as simple as that. You've kind of got to get people to do something. They probably, I guess, it's like jumping out of a plane with a parachute on. It doesn't feel right. I think think for a lot of people, they're going to find it hard to vote against the DA, but if they want Cape independence, unfortunately, they're going to have to. They're simply going to have to, and they're going to have to trust us. And the one thing I can say with the CIAG, and Joe, you've dealt with this a long time, so you know our word is our bond. If we say we will vote with the DA to put them into power, then you can take that to the bank. We will not, under any circumstances, break our word. We know that's critically important to 7 out of 10 Cape independence supporters, and we need to release them, and that has to know that we're going to keep our word, whatever the circumstances are, and we will.
Okay, then the next question is, how does this party differ from the Cape Independence Party? Which is the good question.
Yeah, it's also an excellent question. So thank you. And how does it differ? I think it differs. I think it differs in two ways. And you know, I'm going to have to be sort of quite diplomatic here. So first and foremost, how does it differ? The Cape Independence Party has always taken a very antagonistic approach to the DA and other parties. And as such, it's unlikely to attract DA voters, because as soon as you attack the DA too much, then obviously you force people to start defending the DA. So part of this is kind of getting people to understand that, hang on a second, we're not anti-DA. We know that they've done a good job. We agree with you. We're really grateful for what they've done, but we just want Cape independence too. And that takes a certain amount of like I say, that's going to take a certain amount of nuance to there, and the Cape Independence Party is not very good at attracting DA voters. And then the other one, and I'll be different, you know, the Cape Independence is just not very good at attracting voters, full stop. And I don't want to be disparaging of the Cape Independence Party. I'm very grateful, they're allies of ours, but I mean the bottom line is they haven't been very successful electorally. There are lots of reasons for that. You know, it's not my position to say from there, but we had to make a decision: is do we think Cape Independence Party is going to get this over the line or not? We don't, is the honest answer, and therefore we decided that we were going to form a political party to do it. And we'll work with the Cape Independence Party. We mean no malice to the Cape Independence Party. We're grateful for what they've done, but for whatever reason, and you know, they're not very well funded. They have quite a strange structure, and they get involved in a lot of things that aren't Cape Independence related, that we think doesn't really help them. Our party is Cape Independence, Cape Independence, Cape Independence, nothing but Cape Independence. We're not going to get sidetracked by all of these other political issues. All we want is a referendum.
Thanks for explaining that. Okay, the next question is the focus on convincing DA supporters to vote DA at national level and referendum part at Western Cape provincial level?
No. So this is also a question that we've had and we decided not to complicate this. So the referendum party is almost certainly going to stand at both provincial and national level, and it will just simply join the multi-party coalition. And I have to put some context on that. The multi-party coalition is going to fail at a national level. Let's be absolutely clear. There is zero prospect of the ANC government not being in power post 2024 nationally. It may perhaps be in coalition with somebody else, but the largest and dominant party in the national government post 2024 is going to be the ANC, and by a Roman mile. And one of the interesting statistics is if you take the Western Cape out of South Africa, even knowing everything we know about the ANC now, South African voters outside of the Western Cape are 4 times more likely to vote for the ANC or the EFF than the DA. And that's a shocking statistic. So we have to understand. So our view is that, and it's always been that, and if you read our articles, we've said it from the start, that the Moonshot Pact and now the multi-party coalition is dead in the water. Perhaps it'll deliver something at a provincial level, but it absolutely will fail at a national level. It won't even get close. But the same thing, you know, we understand that people want to live hope, and of course the parties, for their own personal reasons, are selling hope. It suits them for you to hope that there might just be this multi-party government, and therefore the easiest thing for us to do is not to spend our time arguing that. The easiest thing is to say, well, fine, we'll join the coalition, at the end of the day, and we'll do our bit. Whatever vote, go for the referendum party, and also we'll go into the coalition. So we're not going to fight that. We definitely won't be the reason it stops. But actually, there are lots of things that we can do in national government, and one of the really interesting ones is that we can and we will. We'll propose a change to the South African Constitution, which will allow citizens to instigate a referendum. Because we've seen in this situation, the Western Cape Premier has made himself a roadblock to Cape independence. 79% of his own party voters support a referendum. 68% of all voters want a referendum. And he's saying no. He's made himself a roadblock. And that isn't right, and it can't be right. And so one of the things we'd like to see is a change of the South African constitution, and actually to bring in the New Zealand constitution, ironically, has a very, very good system, which allows citizens to instigate referendums if there's enough support. And in New Zealand, that works that if you have a specific cause and you can get 10% of your electorate to say, right, we want a referendum on this subject, you have 9 months to do it in, and thereafter you can have the referendum. So there are lots of things that we can do in the provincial parliament. And up until now, you've never heard the words Cape Independence in the National Assembly. The referendum party can make sure that no debate passes without you hearing the words Cape Independence. So getting somebody into that national parliament is very, very critical. And you know, the ANC and the EFF are going to find that national parliament a very, very different place, because we are not taking a backward step. I promise you that. So the long answer there, we're going to do both. We're going to say support us at both, and we'll support the DA either way. At the end of the day, we're there to drive Cape Independence. We're not there to undermine the DA. So we would like people to vote for us both provincially and nationally.
Okay, let's see the next question. Mark de Villiers, his question is, how will the referendum party force the DA or the Premier to hold a referendum after the 2024 elections?
Also an excellent question, and I wished I had a really clear-cut answer. And I think the easiest way for me to go back is to come back to that story of Moses and the Pharaohs. Yeah, I mean, was it the frogs? Was it the blood? Was it the firstborn?
The blood.
Actually, it's yeah, it was the blood. There we go. It was the firstborns. But actually, what I mean is, it was a cumulative process. At the end of the day, actually, at some point, the other side just gives in. So I would love the fact that actually we come and we do well in the elections. You know, I would love that before we get to the elections, the DA go, oh shit, we don't want any start of this. Let's give them their referendum. That would be great. But you know, we've already had that promise once, so we've got to be wary of promises, because they promised, we did this deal in 2021 before the elections, and after the elections they broke it. So here we are, and so now we're going to have to go into Parliament, and we're going to have to make it uncomfortable, and there's going to be lots and lots of things. So we hope that the DA, when we form the government, will just say, right, okay, we'll make the government, here's our term. Now, because we've promised under no circumstances to not vote with the DA, that does leave a door open for the DA to take advantage of us. But it's important that we're really, really straight and honest with our own voters. And then we end up into a confidence and supply arrangement in Parliament where we support the DA, but we make their life pretty miserable. And we become Moses, and we make their life significantly miserable over everything they want to do, in every debate, in every, when they want to pass budgets, when they want to, and eventually it'll just become more and more frustrating. And at some point, the Democratic Alliance is going to have to realize that they're on the wrong side of this, and we're not asking them to do anything other than ask the people what it is that they want. We have to remember that. We're not asking for independence. We're not asking for any miraculous thing. We're just saying, ask the people what they want. You promise to do it, just do it. And so, at some point, it's just going to become less hassle than it's worth, and they're just going to give us that referendum. I hope it's up front. I hope we don't have to go through 10 plagues like Moses did. But if we have to, we will. We will get our referendum.
The next question is from Garth Kent. Does this not scupper the coalition group that DA and the other parties recently formed to attempt national government majority?
So, look, I think I've answered that one, but so the short answer is no, because we're going to join it. We'll be part of that thing. We don't think it'll succeed, but we're not going to be the reason it fails. So we will join that coalition group, and any vote for us will also be a vote for that national government. And if the DA, by some absolute miracle, can form a national coalition government, then we'll be there, right there with it.
Yes. Then Rian Brandt, his question is there any chance the DA might change tack and still call a referendum to coincide with the 2024 election?
Well, I would love that they did. I would love that they did, because our purpose is to force the referendum. And actually, we could then say, fine, well, then we no longer have to worry about party politics, and we can just focus on the referendum campaign, because actually all we want is a referendum. I think it's unlikely at this point in time. They've been pretty belligerent over the whole thing. So I think it's unlikely, but who knows? We want a referendum, and if the DA give us a referendum, that's all we want.
All right. Then the next question, the FFP is also pro-referendum and independence. Will the referendum party supporting DA not inadvertently undermine the FFP?
No, not at all. I think so. First of all, we've already called this split between 7 out of 10 Western Cape voters or Cape Independence supporters vote DA, and 3 out of 10 don't. And the Freedom Front Plus is getting votes out of things. So we don't want to say, we're absolutely not trying to take votes away from the Freedom Front Plus. We've made that clear. If you're a Freedom Front Plus voter, vote for the Freedom Front Plus. We want to take votes away from the DA, and actually there's a whole section of the electorate that for historical reasons is not going to vote for the Freedom Front Plus. And actually, in many ways, we've got a very good relationship with the Freedom Front Plus. I think Corné Mulder and Peter Maria are absolutely fantastic. They've tabled the Western Cape People's Bill with us. We think the world of them. And actually, I have to say, we know they've made huge bridges with the community to try and make these steps forward. But I mean, we've got to deal with political realities. They are not going to do this alone. We need to get these extra votes. The referendum party is targeting the DA votes. And actually, we also, let's be honest, and we also have to keep the Freedom Front Plus on their toes. It's not like the Freedom Front Plus have been overly banging a drum over Cape independence over the last 12 months. Their primary focus has all been around coalition politics. So it also will do good to keep the Freedom Front Plus on their toes and remind them that Cape independence is a critical issue. So we're a great relationship. No, I think it's healthy. I think we will work together, and I think this will be very, very positive.
Thank you, Phil. I think that was a good question to maybe end this press conference with. It seems like most questions have now been covered. So finishing off, the referendum party is not going to be launched yet for a few weeks still. But if you do support Cape Independence and if you would like to become a member of the referendum party, please visit the Cape Referendum website, which is also linked off the Cape Referendum website, which is also linked in the description below this video. I think this brings us then to the end of this press conference. Phil, if there's anything you would like to add, you can. Otherwise, thank you very much for everybody who joined us this afternoon. We really do appreciate it.
No, thanks, Renee, and I agree, echoed it perfectly. Yeah, please go to that. I think it's referendumparty.org. Sign up, become a member of the referendum party, get involved, and let's make a future. Let's make this first world country in South Africa, in Southern Africa. Let's write history. We can do it.
Thank you.
Thanks.